Hello learners and welcome to the 12th lecture in this NPTEL course on 20th century poetry. In the previous lecture, I began by reading a couple of poems from Thomas Hardy's collection, The Poems of 1912-1913. As I promised, I will read from a couple of more poems from this collection before moving on into the work of later poets and other kinds of ideas and discussions. I will read the second poem in this collection, which is titled Your Last Drive. Here is how the poem goes, and I read quoting Thomas Hardy. Here by the moorway you returned and saw the borough lights ahead that lit your face all undiscerned to be in a week the face of the dead. And you told of the charm of that haloed view that never again would beam on you. So these 6 lines of the first stanza are very typical of elegiac verse. He is describing a person who is no longer alive, and he's remembering the last act, a last act of a kind that this person had undertaken. That is, they had driven along a familiar route, and Hardy remembers the changing light as the sun set and caught the face of Emma Gifford. And the first part of this poem, Hardy simply fleshes out the physical, material details of that memory, where they were, what they were doing, how the light changed, and how this memory has become fixed in Hardy's mind. And the interesting thing that Hardy notices in these opening sentences is that nobody could tell, and the word here is all undiscerned, right? That nobody could tell or nobody could predict that amidst such beauty or such beauty would be replaced by absolute end and absolute death. Now, after describing this, the poet creates an expectation of what further he will give us, and here is how the poem progresses. And on your left, you pass the spot where 8 days later you were to lie, and be spoken of as one who was not. Beholding it with a heedless eye, as alien from you, though under its tree you soon would halt everlastingly. Right? So it says that on this drive, not only did Emma experience and saw a lot of beautiful countryside, but Emma also drove past the burial site, the site where Emma would be laid to rest after her death. And it is the ordinariness, it is the lack of any forewarning, it is the matter-of-factness of all of this which Hardy is struggling to process now that Emma has passed away. That death comes so suddenly because it is simply out of the imagination in our everyday life. We go through life not thinking that death can take us at any time. And in some ways, this anticipates the kind of ideas and emotional terrain that we went over in Wallace Stevens's The Emperor of Ice Cream. Stevens is occupying a very different formal register, extremely tight and extremely compressed poetic styles. But Hardy, in some ways, is moving towards that style too. And the difference in the years of composition is about a decade. So we can see how poetic styles become more and more compressed and are able to give readers this very particular awareness of the permanence and the pervasiveness of death in modern life. Let us read the 2 remaining stanzas. Hardy writes, I drove not with you, yet had I sat at your side that eve, I should not have seen that the countenance I was glancing at had a last time look in the flickering sheen, nor have read the writing upon your face. I go hence soon to my resting place. So Hardy is expressing two forms of regret here. The first is that he missed this chance. He did not know that it would be Emma's last ride, so obviously he did not treat it as urgent that he should accompany Emma on this drive. Because he was not there, he missed out on seeing a potential prophetic vision. What is potentially prophetic? If he knew that this was going to be her last ride, he would have noticed some things in her appearance. That is, he would have read everything he saw, he would have interpreted everything he saw as having a quality of momentousness. That is, he would interpret everything as if it were a symbol of some great and everlasting truth. Last looks, what does it mean to say that last looks or endings are very meaningful? We talk about the endings of novels. We talk about the last words of famous people and even not very famous people. The words that people say or are recorded as saying or writing just before they pass away. These words are freighted with a great deal of meaning. Why is that so? That meaning is affixed, projected posthumously. Once it becomes known that the person is no longer alive and their last words are identified as last words. This meaning is projected by those who remain alive while the speaker, or in this case, the traveler themselves or Emma herself, has passed away. Now that Hardy is alive and Emma is gone, Hardy remembers that this particular ride was her last drive. At the time, it was simply an ordinary drive. So Hardy's realization that he missed this opportunity is complicated. Now that he knows it was her last drive, he regrets that he wasn't there. But then, as soon as he regrets that he wasn't there, he realizes even if he was there, he would not pay attention. He would not think and notice and interpret all the details of this experience because he would never have dreamt that this was going to be Emma's last drive. So that's what explains this sentence. Yet had I sat, I should not have seen that countenance. That he was looking at something he would not see again. That he was looking at something for the last time. That he would not have seen her face, which was saying to him that I go hence to my resting place. So Hardy's memory of what he has not witnessed or what he might have witnessed is also complicated by this deep longing for Emma in his life. It is further complicated by the fact that he could not have controlled anything, and he cannot control anything even now. So even his longing to be with Emma on her last drive is complicated by the fact that he could not have achieved anything even then. He would still be missing out on all the details that he is now imagining into being. He is imagining how she might have looked on her last drive. And even if he was with her, he would still be having to imagine those details because he would not have remembered them, because he would not have observed Emma as going on her last drive. And then the last stanza. You may miss me then, but I shall not know how many times you visit me there, or what your thoughts are, or if you go there never at all. And I shall not care. Should you censure me, I shall take no heed. And even your praises no more shall need, right? So this is Hardy speaking for Emma. He's quoting Emma's words, of course not the real Emma, but the look that Emma would have had if Hardy had known that this was her last drive. And this is an instance of a poet imagining a speaker. The poet is fictionalizing, dreaming what Emma's look might have said if Hardy had the hindsight and the prophetic wisdom to know that this was Emma's last ride. And what is it that Emma says? Emma says something consoling, but at the same time extremely chilling and extremely cold as well. Emma says, "You may miss me." That is, Emma predicts what Hardy is going through now, and also says that it is futile. It is futile for Hardy to long for Emma, remember her, write about her, because she shall not know and she shall not care. And she shall also not pay attention if Hardy were to censure her, that is, uh, berate her, accuse her, say unpleasant things, accuse her of doing something unpleasant or painful. So his censure itself will have no meaning. And we can see already the poet is in dialogue, supposedly with his dead wife, but in fact he's in dialogue with himself. This poem writes back to the previous poem, which was essentially a series of accusations. The first poem censured Emma. In the second poem, Emma comes back from the dead, or if not the dead, then the memory of Emma while she was alive comes back to Hardy and reminds Hardy that Hardy's accusations, Hardy's scolding, Hardy's anger, his desire to vent his powerless frustrations and his anger on the figure of this dead wife actually has no real meaning other than serving an egotistical pleasure that Hardy gets by writing about this person who is no longer alive. So, this is an account of the first two poems in this collection. I will now move to two different kinds of poems. The first is the 12th poem in this collection, which comes roughly in the middle of this 21 poem sequence. This is a poem that represents Hardy's emotions at a somewhat more evolved and somewhat more mature level. Without further preface, let us read what this poem does. This is the 12th poem in the sequence, which is titled After a Journey. Hereto I come to view a voiceless ghost. Whither, oh whither will its whim now draw me? Up the cliff, down, till I'm lonely, lost, and the unseen water's ejaculations awe me. Where will you next be, there's no knowing, facing around about me everywhere, with your nut-colored hair, and grey eyes and rose flush coming and going. So these words are written at roughly a midpoint in Hardy's travels. After Emma passed away in November of 1912, Hardy undertook a series of travels, chiefly revisiting the district of Cornwall and visiting those same locations, the moors, the countryside, natural beauties, as well as cultural locations, hotels, restaurants, inns, where the couple had stayed and had meals while they were traveling there. So it is at one such point, while he is resting in his travels in this countryside, remembering his wife, that Hardy writes these words. And between the poems I just read and this poem, there have been several instances where Hardy has been confronted by this ghost, confronted by a voice. This ghost and this voice does two things. As we read in the poem, The Voice, it reminds Hardy of two visions, or at least two sets of visions. The first is Emma as Hardy would like to remember before he begins mourning. This is Emma as somewhat powerless, lacking agency, lacking independence, a cardboard figure propped up by the grieving male poet. The second set of vision, or the second set of versions that Hardy encounters, is a more powerful, fully voiced Emma, a more independent Emma, a figure of Emma much more aligned with the realistic figure, with the memories of unpleasantness that Hardy is now slowly beginning to gather. So when Hardy writes in these words, where you will next be, there's no knowing, what he's really saying is, I don't know what will happen next, at which stop or at which point you will shock me. I will stumble into this ghost of you, but in fact, not really a ghost of you, an unpleasant memory of myself. And so Hardy is constantly bracing for impact. He's constantly on edge. He's shuddering. He's anxious. He's thinking at what point and how to prepare himself for being confronted with more unpleasant details of his own past. Further, yes, I have re entered your olden haunts at last. Through the years, through the dead scenes, I have tracked you. What have you now found to say of our past? Scanned across the dead space wherein I have lacked you. Summer gave us sweets, but autumn wrought division. Things were not lastly, as firstly well. With us twain, you tell, but all's closed now, despite time's derision. So he's now accepting. We have reached a point where the poetic persona is growing more mature, is evolving. We have come a long way from the accusatory voice of the very first poem. In this poem, Hardy's persona is not angry at Emma's memory or ghost for reminding him of his own failures. In fact, Hardy is quite willing and quite eager to accept his own failures, because accepting these failures, even though it may not console Hardy, even though it may not comfort Hardy while he is grieving for Emma, it does something else. It takes Hardy to a place of acceptance, takes Hardy to a place of emotional honesty, which is not closure, which is not as simplistic as closure, but in fact, it is a beginning. It is the beginning of accepting their own past, the beginning of a process in which he realizes the life that he has had with Emma. He realizes what he had been refusing to remember. And it is the beginning of allowing those unpleasant memories to come back, to build a new memory that Hardy can be said to credit the genre of the elegy, right? But let me not overinterpret this. Let me read or try and unpack what this stanza is doing. He says that after scanning and tracking this ghost, he has reached a point where he can truly listen to what this voice is saying. And he had refused because what this voice was saying was not pleasant. This voice is saying that summer gave them sweets, but autumn wrought division. Things were not lastly as firstly well, right? So things got worse. Theirs was not a storybook or an idealized or a fairy tale romance. Everyone likes to believe that they've had a happy life, that they've experienced a union which is like the epic and romantic love stories of the past. And Hardy was one such person. He had this illusion or this desire to believe that his relationship with Emma was full of that kind of romance. He is now accepting that it was not the case, but that realization is not making him angry. It is taking him to a better, more evolved, more mature realization. Further, I see what you are doing. You are leading me on to the spots we knew when we haunted here together. The waterfall above which the mist bow shone, and the then fair hour in the then fair weather, and the cave just under, with a voice still so hollow that it seems to call out to me from 40 years ago, when you were all aglow, and not the thin ghost that I now frailly follow. Right? So again, having reached that very difficult moment of realization that he should not idealize the past, that he should temper that idealized memory with a more sober realization of the unpleasant future, Hardy immediately falls back into a more childlike idealization. What does he do? He says that you are leading me on. Again, he blames Emma's ghost for leading him on as he's tracking their familiar places. He's taken back to an idealized past. And the voice uh, again seems to come from 40 years ago when she was all aglow and not ghostly. So again, shuttling continues. The poet is unable to hold on to that moment of clear, rational, sober memory. Memory is difficult. Memory is slipping out of the poet's hands. Last stanza. Ignorant of what there is, flitting here to see, the waked birds preen and the seals flop lazily. Soon you will have, dear, to vanish from me, for the stars close their shutters and the dawn whitens hazily. Trust me, I mind not, though life lowers, the bringing me here, nay, bring me here again. I am just the same as when our days were a joy and our paths through flowers. Right? So we see that this poem ends with the poet capitulating. But still, there is progress because the stanza in the middle of the poem, where Hardy is able to hear Emma's ghost say some unpleasant truths, break the illusion of his idealized past, is still more than Hardy had allowed in the first poem. Right? I will now conclude this discussion by reading the 15th poem in this sequence, which is titled At Castle Bottrell. At Castle Bottrell. As I drive to the junction of lane and highway, and the drizzle bedrenches the wagonette, I look behind at the fading byway, and see on its slope, now glistening wet, distinctly yet, myself and a girlish form benighted, in dry March weather. We climbed the road beside a chaise. We had just alighted to ease the sturdy pony's load, when he sighed and slowed. So, we see that here the poet is remembering two things. He's remembering two visits, two travels. The first is from the immediate past, that is, in the days or weeks prior to the writing of these words. The second, he's also remembering a visit from many years ago when Emma was alive and the two of them had traveled to the same place. Just to recall, the framing of these poems is the travel that Hardy had undertaken in the months after Emma passed away. So that is the difference between the first stanza and the second. The second stanza begins with these words, myself and a girlish form benighted in dry March weather. Right? So these two narratives have been established. Let us see now how the poet's memory progresses and whether or not Hardy can achieve the kind of psychological progress that seems to be needed, or at least the kind of honesty that seems to be needed, and which he is struggling to accept as a speaking and writing poet. What we did as we climbed and what we talked of matters not much, nor to what it led, something that life will not be balked of, without rude reason till hope is dead and feeling fled. Right? So he remembers that what they did, the details of it, and what they talked about is less important than the fact that they experienced something. And what did they experience? Something that life will not be balked of, without rude reason till hope is dead and feeling fled. Right? So that memory fills the poet with hope. It was an experience that gave these two individuals a sense of expectation. They went through life thinking that there was so much more of life to live. That is sorely lacking in the state the poet finds himself at this point. Let us read further. It filled but a minute, but was there ever a time of such quality, since or before, in that hill story? To one mind never, though it has been climbed, foot swift, foot sore, by thousands more. Right? So the two of them had stepped off their carriage because the pony or the horse was struggling to carry them, and they had walked beside the carriage while the pony carried their carriage up the hill and below. So it was this brief experience of walking with Emma eased the labor of the horse that a, a very ordinary and matter-of-fact experience that Hardy now remembers and feels that it was in this very ordinary and very matter-of-fact experience that the best days, the most joyous experience of their marriage was contained. Further, he writes, primeval rocks from the road's steep border, and much have they faced there, first and last, of the transitory in earth's long order. But what they record in color and cast is that we too passed. Right? So the poet's memory takes on geological connotations. The poet feels that the rocks, they remain, but they have registered the experience of these two people walking on them. Even though it was only for a few minutes, and even though it was many years ago, those rocks contain that memory. And what they say, the rocks, if they could speak, the only trace of that experience is that the two of them have walked over it, and further that that experience is over, that time's arrow moves in one direction, that even though Hardy remembers it with great longing, the final or the unshakable truth that emerges from this memory is that it cannot be recreated. That is the defining truth of that moment. And to me, though time's unflinching rigor in mindless rote has ruled from sight the substance now, one phantom figure remains on the slope, as when that night saw us alight. Right? So he says that even though time finishes everything, right, there is no one who can survive the onslaughts of time. And true enough, Emma is dead, Hardy is himself old and about to die. Time conquers all, Hardy acknowledges, but says that there's something that time fails to conquer, right? There's something that time fails to remove or defeat. What is that? One phantom figure remains on the slope, as when that night saw us alight, right? Who is this one phantom figure? Hardy writes, I look and see it there, shrinking, shrinking. I look back at it amid the rain. For the very last time, for my sand is sinking, and I shall traverse old love's domain, never again. Right? So, a very sad and a very depressing conclusion to this poem. But it is tempered, or the depressing conclusion comes from a somewhat hopeful image, which is that a phantom figure remains. So this is how Hardy ends this poem, which I believe is an iconic poem at Castle Bottrell. Although there are 6 more poems in the sequence, I will not read any more. I will stop there because this poem, I believe, describes the poignancy, the futility, the emotional complexity, as well as the power of this literary form, the elegy, as it was practiced and as it was reinvented, I would say, by the words of Thomas Hardy. The ending, that Hardy declares that he shall traverse old love's domain never again, describes not just the fact that elegy is futile, but rather the form of the elegy has taken the poet and brought him to a very important emotional realization that some things can never be recreated. His mistakes cannot be undone. He must live with the realization that his failures made their lives significantly worse. And he must live with the regret that even though he understands now what he might have done earlier, he cannot go back and change that. He also realizes that this inability to go back and change has come from a desire to go back and change. That desire exists. That desire fuels these poems. Hardy would like very much to change. He is filled with regret. He is consumed by that desire. And yet, the condition of realizing these failures is that he cannot go back and change them. That is Hardy's tragedy. That is what makes these poems very powerful. The realism, the complexity, the honesty, and the sincerity with which Hardy describes his thoughts, his feelings, and coupled with a very realistic, sober, and somewhat tragic realization that he cannot do anything about it. He can only be sadder as he tries to alleviate his sadness. This is what Ramazani and so many other scholars mean when they say that 20th century elegists refuse consolation. They refuse consolation, they remain disconsolate, and they seem to wallow in their grief. Wallowing in grief is seen as a very negative thing, unproductive. However, as we will see in the work of other 20th century poets, wallowing is not negative or unproductive. In fact, wallowing has produced some of the most powerful, iconic, and memorable poems in the English language. I will stop there, and we will explore the life and work of H.D. or Hilda Doolittle in the next lecture. Thank you.